Hi, thank you. And it's brilliant to be here. And actually, part of this session, I thought I really enjoyed that last presentation. So thank you. I'm looking forward to the others. So what we're going to be talking about, I think, fits within the conference themes around kind of web archives and how they fit more widely into born digital collecting. And also what we're going to do for this is sort of, I think, kind of try and show some of our working out and some of kind of the thinking and research that led us along the way to how we've been working around complex digital publications. So I'm afraid I'm going to sort of hop about a bit because it's always a bit messy, the working out process, but hopefully it's going to make sense as we go. And then we're going to talk about contextual collecting because that's one of the sort of conclusions we've been led to and something we're really excited about. So we're talking about complex digital publications. Just a sort of quick explanation of what we mean by that. And if Kaylin's in the room, she'll recognize this because Kaylin did a lot of the kind of original kind of research and thinking around what we should talk about. So they are born digital works. They have no print counterpart, or if they do, the print counterpart is a very kind of separate thing and a different experience. Multimodal in the sense that they're made up of lots of different parts. So they might have text in them, they may have kind of video or audio, they'll have interactive elements, those sorts of things. And then kind of they're often built with a certain type of software or certain type of hardware in mind, often something that looks more like this than a laptop or a PC. So all that really combines for a couple of things. One is a high preservation risk, but the other one is really that reminds us of the importance of understanding the context within which they were created. So what kind of the author or creator or artist's intent was, how they were working, how it was received, how people used it. So it's a really big and complicated area. So we decided to narrow our focus in, and we've been looking at books presented as apps and interactive narratives on the web. And the really exciting thing on this slide is we're working now towards an exhibition opening in about 2 or 3 weeks' time at the library to showcase some of these works that we've been thinking about and the kinds of kind of variety and diversity of interactive storytelling. So when we first started about this, we were trying to understand what kind of a problem have we got, what kind of environment are we in? And we thought about this as a complex issue. And so that was sort of thinking that systems and processes and practices didn't really exist at the moment as far as we knew to manage this type of material. And if we tried applying things that we knew did exist, they might not have predictable results. So our response was very much in this probe sense and then respond and move on. So we treated it very much in terms of we needed to do a lot of research, we needed to talk to people and find out. And we had this kind of idea of safe experimentation. So the idea of we'd try things out, and if they didn't work, fine, we'd stop. And if we found that they were successful, we'd think of ways in which we could scale them up. And sort of slightly kind of cutting against the grain of this, but also reminding ourselves why it was important, why we were doing this. It fits in with our legal deposit mandate, so that's kind of the 6 legal deposit libraries of the UK working together on this. We've recently celebrated our 10 years of electronic legal deposit since regulations changed, and we kind of came up with this really eye-catching everything forever. And I think what that does is like, no, we've not done that. But it reminds us both of the sort of scale and the ambition that we're working towards, and kind of like the importance of this as well, why it matters. So kind of forever, we are preserving for the very long term, and everything is really about, our aim is to represent the kind of full diversity of publishing in the UK. So all the different voices that are included there. And with actually the work we've been doing around complex digital objects and interactive narratives really help us in that, and they form part of that commitment to kind of collecting inclusively. So one of the things I just wanted to show was a kind of chart from a piece of research by Linda Clark, who actually presented at Zagreb at the Web Archiving Conference. Around her work where she was testing different web archiving tools for collecting interactive narratives. And as she was testing those tools, what she was doing was kind of like checking looking through things like genre, who was writing and what were they writing about. And a lot of the work she found were very, very personal. So talking about things like kind of mental health, and kind of like experiences that people had had. And there were the kinds of things that weren't finding their way into other types of publication and weren't finding their ways kind of in publications that you'd find outside of the web. So actually doing this has been really important for us. And web archiving is a really kind of significant part of this work. So it's part of our UK legal deposit work. It's also, we do a number of things. So we kind of collect the web as a format and as a record of behavior and communication, but it also is a site of publication of lots and lots of different types of things. So it's important for us in terms of, say, collecting government publications, but also this work we've been doing around emerging formats. And also they're kind of recording the context of publication. What we found was really important was people talking about kind of what the technologies are, what they allow them to do, how they're received, how they're reviewed, what goes wrong, all those sorts of things people talk about on the web. So to collect that, we need to be doing web archiving. And lastly, absolutely essential for access. One of the really big challenges we have with these kind of material is how we're going to make them available, how are people going to see them. Right now, web archive is the only way we can do that. So talking about some of the research we've been doing, starting out with kind of collection building. So Linda's research into kind of different web archiving tools and how they help us in collecting interactive narratives. And this is really part of our kind of safe experimentation. And we found it worked well. Even kind of tools developed for archiving at scale. Heritrix performs better than we expected. A lot better than we'd expected. So we knew we could scale up, which was really important, and we knew we could do that documentation around in terms of like what is being created, how is it being received. So building on from that, and yeah, I have to pause and say we're really excited about kind of the possibilities of high fidelity crawling here. This is really going to help us immensely. But we could use the collections we had and make new collections. So one there is the New Media Writing Prize, which is an annual event where people can kind of nominate their own works, and we collect as much as we can of those materials. But then we were able to kind of use those collections to analyze them and start to understand what we mean by things like, have we got a good capture? And this was research that Tegan Pike was doing with Giulia about 2 years ago, and also I think presented last year's Web Archive conference. So yeah, we've been trying to tell you as we go. So what we were finding actually though is that these kind of questions about good capture are as much kind of social and cultural questions as they are technological. So actually the sorts of things that define that are more about kind of have we captured the atmosphere of a work? Is the narrative still intact? Those sorts of things. And that really kind of leads us to thinking about kind of our preservation planning and our preservation planning being defined by use and users and who our users are. Quickly skip the next bit. We can come back if we need to. So thinking about our users, we've prioritised in our planning for the next few years 2 groups. So researchers in higher education and creators of works we're collecting. Often there's a lot of overlap between those 2 groups. And that's really because they're the people kind of we're close to at the moment and the people who are kind of like tolerate our experimental, it might go wrong approach. And that understand the value, and particularly for creators, really kind of understanding that value of preserving works over the longer term. We know that reading for pleasure is also really important, but that's going to need more mature services before it's going to start to become more kind of appealing and something to be more picked up. So we've got to learn with these 2 groups first. And yeah, thinking about our exhibition coming up, that's really going to help us in understanding our needs as users, as kind of a library, to be able to kind of interpret the works we're collecting and show them to a wider audience. So actually, as we've been developing that exhibition, kind of working out what's going to work, what's not going to work in terms of putting things into a physical space is really helping us. So hopefully that's something we can talk about another time. So we also did some user research. In 2019, we commissioned Bunnyfoot to talk to groups of users. So those were our kind of creators, our researchers, our readers for pleasure. And they really helped validate a number of things we were thinking of at the time and thinking about what would matter and what would be important. The one thing I'm going to pick up on here is like the strong support for contextual collecting. So this is about all the materials that tell us about the environment within which something was created, what was intended, what did the author mean when they were doing it. And our users kind of thought about that as important, both as a kind of information in its own right, in being able to say what's changing in the culture around us, but also kind of very specifically and tactically where we were trying to collect something and we may not have been able to collect it all, or there may be some sort of gap to kind of help fill that and help kind of understand what's there and what might be missing. And then just also thinking about kind of the needs of users in the future, which again, I think are kind of like social and cultural considerations. So what's the implicit knowledge in some of these works that's not going to be kind of obvious in and of the works of themselves? And, you know, we're kind of thinking like, what behaviors do people have around technology at the moment? So the whole kind of like swiping, tapping, scrolling, is that going to be the same in 20 years, in 30 years? How will people know how to do that? And kind of what will people need to know to be able to use these works in the future? And how do we record and preserve that? So very quickly, that sort of led through to our collection management decision. So the importance of engaging with creators as we're collecting and the need to actually be able to do that as we collect. Being able to say we're not going to try and collect it all. I really like that idea of kind of like needing to be a bit slow and kind of thinking about what we're getting and what we're not getting. And pausing and knowing we're not going to collect everything. So what we're doing is representing a process and representing kind of cultural change. And just kind of the importance of access as well, and access now as well as thinking about access in the future. So I am going to stop there and I'm going to hand over to Giulia, who's going to talk to us about some of our contextual collecting experiments.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, great. So we mentioned contextual information, and as Ian mentioned, that is kind of all the material that is not really the publication itself, but it kind of help describe the publication. So it can give information about how the publication was used, as well as the kind of original content, not context in which it was published, and the original look and feel of a publication as well. And it can consist of a variety of things like interviews with authors and users, playthrough videos, screenshot images, and so on. And the reason why we want to collect contextual information is that this type of documentation is very helpful to fill in the gaps for those kind of publication that either couldn't be collected in their entirety or maybe lost some of the functionalities on the way. It might also be the only option for those publications that are no longer accessible at all. And we've been collecting contextual material directly from publishers and authors quite a lot, but we've also experimented a bit with creating some of the material ourselves, which takes me to this. So we hosted a PhD placement student, Florence Smith-Nichols, for 6 months at the British Library, and they help us with a pilot project on contextual information for emerging formats. And to tie in with the digital storytelling exhibition, we filmed short playthrough videos for 3 of the narratives that we included in the exhibition. And you can see here some of the exclusive behind-the-scenes photos of Florence and I filming at the Interaction Lab at CT University. And I swear it's safer than it looks. But the idea was to create videos that in less than 2 minutes would give viewers an idea of what the narrative was about, as well as the main interactions and gesture you need to to read these narratives. And in the gallery, these videos will work as actual instructions to the playable versions of the games that we will exhibit, but they will also be added to our collection as contextual material for these specific publications. And you can see here 2 stills from the resulting playthrough videos for the 80 Days app and the Wolves in the Walls VR experience. So creating contextual information ourselves meant that we could include what we needed in the documentation, things like the instructions or showcasing the interaction with the original device, a summary of the work, and so on. But it also meant that we could choose the format we wanted that documentation to be in and kind of ensure that it's a format that we can support. It also allows us to think about clearing rights for reuse at the moment of creation, as we know that users are interested in reusing contextual information for their own research. On the other hand, the process of creating the video, as you can imagine, has been quite time-consuming and also required us to access a studio with professional equipment to kind of record this type of interaction. So it's not really easily scalable. Having a direct collaboration with the artists and studios responsible for the works also was incredibly helpful, as permission needed to be cleared to use the content for the playthrough videos. And the cartographer's confession was another case study that Florence focused on during their placement. And I think it's an interesting example because although it wasn't published that long ago, in 2017, the app is no longer available on commercial app stores. So we collected some material directly from the author and the producer, but also Florence worked on a collection matrix and they researched what we already had in the UK Web Archive for the cartographer's confession, which very much formed the basis of the background research they did for this project, as well as they identified new relevant websites to target for collection and to add to the UK Web Archive. In terms of challenges and next steps, very much connected to the cartographer's confession and emerging formats more widely. As Ian mentioned, we still don't really have access solution for the emerging formats that are not currently hosted in the UK Web Archive. So things like the app files that we collected or any other non-browser based material that we collected. We very much want to continue to work collaboratively across legal deposit libraries to ensure that access is available across sites. And further work is also necessary to develop rights and reuse framework for contextual information. And discovery is another challenge for us, as well as kind of presenting content together by linking related material together. So working on the exhibition has given us a great opportunity to kind of promote and understand how to present and collect emerging formats. We learn a lot, not just about how to display digital objects in a physical space, but also how to display objects that are very much meant to exist in a network environment as discrete entities within a gallery specifically. And we mentioned before the importance of collaborating closely with authors and creators, and that's not just to clear permission really, but also to learn from them, especially what the core aspects of their work are and how we can present those successfully to our audience. We thought a lot about context and interpretation, especially as we had to present the works as distinct entities. We wanted to make sure that contextual material was available, whether that material was previously collected or maybe just interpretation text, and that also included instruction on use and thinking about how the audience might interact with the work and what kind of guidelines might be useful for them to have. And this might also feed into how we think about metadata in the future for this type of works. And we try where possible to present local versions of the interactives in the exhibition, but unfortunately that is not always a possibility. So we kind of had to consider what are the core elements for each work, so what elements we needed to retain in order for the work to still be the work. Which in some cases meant having a live connection to external data. To conclude, these emerging formats work help us understand collection, management requirements for other complex digital objects across the library, whether that is development of high-fidelity web crawling tools or dealing with challenges encountered by born digital archives and manuscripts, for example. It also helps us understand access requirements, so it's a useful framework to think about how we might provide an emulation service in the future, and also ways to present link content and also metadata for complex digital publications. And we are learning from and sharing knowledge with other institutions facing similar challenges, whether in this forum or other cultural heritage organizations that are concerned with preservation of net art, or video games, or time-based media art, for example. Here are some references to things we mentioned. And thank you very much. That's all from us.